This interview is sponsored by My Patriot Supply. When emergencies strike, you always see news stories of long lines of people and empty store shelves. There's no need to be a part of that chaos and the possibility of having to deal with FEMA food lines. Those that know what's coming are using today to prepare. You should make a plan too. I have, starting with building an emergency food supply, and I trust and use My Patriot Supply. They're experts in emergency preparedness and have guaranteed 2-day delivery. Disasters won't wait. Why should you? Act now and save $70 on a 2-week emergency food kit when you go to my special website, preparewithx22.com. My Patriot Supply food kits last up to 25 years in storage and include breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. Order a few today and receive guaranteed 2-day delivery discreetly to your door. Take action so you're ready for what's coming and save $70. It's better to have and not need than need and not have. Go to preparewithx22.com. Click the link below. Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today we have a returning guest, Lynette Zang. Lynette is the Chief Market Analyst at ITM Trading. That's itmtrading.com. And I am very happy to have her back on the X22 Report Spotlight. Lynette, welcome back to the Spotlight.
Thank you, Dave. As always, I'm very, very happy to be here. I always enjoy our conversations.
So do I, and thank you for coming back on the Spotlight. And I wanted to start off with the Fed. And they cut the rates 3 times now. Now, Trump is out there and he's continually bashing the Fed. And he's continually pointing out that it's not China. That's not our big problem. It is the Fed. That is our problem. And what I'm hearing now is that there are certain individuals within the Fed that are saying that, yeah, this is it. The Fed is not going to cut any more rates. We're going to hold steady. Now, do you believe them? Do you think that's it? We're done cutting rates right now?
No, I don't believe them. I see us going to negative rates, which there was recently a report that came out by the San Francisco Fed in support of going to the negative rates, just at a time when in Europe and in Denmark and in Japan, they're really learning that these negative rates, shocker, are not really working the way they wanted them to work. But it looks like we're going to negative rates. And no, I love that these 3 rate cuts were preemptive, but we're at 1.5% now. So, and they're battling a crisis because when you look at their Fed balance sheet, they're now above 4 trillion again and climbing pretty darn close to the same speed, growing their balance sheet at pretty much the same speeds that they did in 2009 when they were battling the crisis. But yet everything is hunky-dory, so they'd like us to believe. I think it's garbage.
Yeah. I mean, if you go back to 2008, 2009, it seems like we're just repeating everything that happened back then. Now, back then, they lowered the rates, they kicked in stimulus 1, 2, 3, and here we are. I know they don't call this QE or stimulus or anything else. They just make up different words for it, but we're really back to where we were. And we see that, like you just mentioned, other central banks, the EU, we have, I think China just cut their rate also. Everyone is cutting their rate. Now, when we really look at this, and it was funny because I'm reading the mainstream media articles and the reports that they're coming out, and they didn't want Trump to pester the Fed to lower the rates, because when you lower the rates, that implodes the economy. But every time we had a recession, every time something went wrong, was prior to the Fed lowering the rates. They raised the rates, they hit like this tipping point, and then all of a sudden they dropped it.
Exactly.
So since we never got to that tipping point, I don't think we ever got to that point where they were going to tip the economy over. Do you still think we're headed into a recession this year or next year? Have they put it off?
Well, number one, back in December when they raised the rates again, that could very well have been the tipping point. And that remains to be seen how soon we go into an official recession. But, when you bring that up, we were starting with a Fed funds rate around 20%. And every time they lower the rates in order to get people to borrow and spend, once they start doing that and inflation becomes noticeable, then they'd start to raise the rates. But the point is that when you look at the graph, you have a series of lower and lower and lower highs. So all this time, what they've really been doing is using up that tool. I am not, even though they have been manipulating the yield curve again so that it is not, it's flat, but it's not inverted like it was. No, I really do think that that last raise in December was the tipping point, because right after that came the pivot. And that's when they stopped running off the balance sheet and they started lowering rates again. And when you look on the Federal Reserve balance sheet, and anybody can, you just Google it, it'll come up on the Federal Reserve, and you look at the speed, what happened? September, the repo market froze. Why does that matter? Because what typically, first of all, the repo market is the financial plumbing for the world for short-term loans. But typically what funds those loans are money market accounts that we're told are so safe. I have a few questions around this, and I don't know, maybe you know the answer to this, but that's when the Fed started injecting again massive quantities at a speed very similar to what they did in 2009 in the depth of the crisis. So I don't think that they averted it at all. I don't think that just because they managed to shift the shorter term rates below the longer term rates a little teeny bit, I don't think that that means that we are not headed into a recession. And frankly, there are some indications that we could still see that by the end of this year, and we're in November.
I just want to go back to 2008, 2009. I mean, we had the Fed lowering the rates, starting stimulus QE1, then QE2, QE3. We had the ECB pretty much doing the same thing. Now, we went from 2008, 2009, all the way up, and here we are at 2019. No reported recession. Yes, we can look at the people's economic indicators, and we can see that people, yes, there were troubles. There were troubles in the retail market, there's troubles in the housing market, there's troubles everywhere. But what I noticed with what the central banks do, and I think this is maybe why Trump is pushing them to lower rates, is that through manipulating the economy, they have the ability to keep the system moving along without it imploding.
Well, or at least appearing to move along.
I mean,
because, part of what you have to ask, this is a big, I was doing my work this morning and I'm looking at it. And since 2008 and 9, we have, or not we have, but the global central banks and the global corporations and the global consumers have injected, how many trillions of dollars worth of debt into the system. And interestingly enough, number one, it has not stimulated the economy. It's stimulated the fiat money markets. But number two, we now are inside of a liquidity trap, which is why they're printing again, which basically means that where did all that money go? Why is there no liquidity in this system? Where are your money market deposits? I mean, I'm betting you actually probably don't have money markets, but for a lot of people that are nervous about the stock market and they're trying to be, protective of their wealth. And so they're flooding into money markets. Well, I know that money is used to buy short-term, overnight debt instruments, treasuries, etc. Why is there a liquidity trap with a level of liquidity that has been pumped into the system? Where is all that money?
In the banks? I mean,
pumping
up the stock market.
It is propping up. Yeah. I mean, that is where it is. You're right. It's in these different assets to keep things appearing so that it doesn't seem like we're in a depression. But 40% of the population couldn't pull $400 together in an emergency. Sure. And more people are stressed about money at debt levels that are higher than they've ever had to account for. And their wages are still not keeping pace with the increased cost of living. So I don't know, there's an official recession or depression, and then there's the unofficial one. And I might argue that boots on the ground, if you're a normal person, you've been in recession since 2008. Most of the people have not really come out of it. So just like it's called financial engineering.
Yeah,
you know?
Well, the whole system, right? The whole system is completely manipulated. It's a gigantic
100%.
illusion. And I think what everyone is confusing, everyone confuses this economic system with a sound money economic system. This is a central bank economic system that they developed back in 1913. They revised it in the 40s. They revised it again in the 70s. And here we are today. Now we're on a full fiat central bank system, which is not just here in the United States. It's global.
It's global.
It's global right now. And they've manipulated it. Go ahead.
100%.
Yeah.
But I was also going to say that there has definitely been a ratcheting up in that loss of confidence, because every con game requires confidence. And so there has been, I mean, you're seeing it in Iran and in Iraq and all over the world, in Venezuela, in Argentina, and in this country. I have never seen so many newspaper articles questioning the validity or the ability of the central banks to actually get us out of this mess, because they don't have the tools. But that's an indication of a loss of confidence. And that's the only thing that's really holding this system together is confidence in the traditional institutions. And even President Trump is an indication in this country of that loss of confidence in the traditional institutions. But recently, I've never seen so many newspaper articles questioning the ability of the central banks to turn this tide, because they don't have, the only thing they have is money printing and interest rates. And at 1.5%, considering the fact don't hold me to this because I'm not looking at it, but I believe before the 2008 crisis, we were at like 5.75% or 5.5%, somewhere in there on the overnight Fed funds rate. And so on average, when they drop those rates to stimulate spending and therefore stimulate the economy, well, they've dropped them roughly about 5.5% to 5.75% on average. So at 1.5%, where are they going? They're going negative. There is no other option. They held it at zero for, a very long time. Between 2009 and 2016 is when they started raising rates. And what we knew at that time was that inside of this crisis, any country that attempted to raise interest rates to give themselves some ammunition, that's what that's about, any country had been forced to lower it. And guess what we now know? The U.S. is not an exception to that rule. They couldn't raise them anymore either. And I do think that trigger point was December. And if you stop to think about it, paying somebody to buy a house, paying somebody to take on debt, I mean, in theory anyway, it could make it look like things are continuing, the economy is continuing to grow. I mean, they're trying desperately to save the housing market, the real estate market, with all sorts of gimmicks.
Yeah, they've been doing that
and
for,
shifts in.
They've been doing that for a while, where they have all these gimmicks with loans and stuff like that, no down payments, and they do a lot of different things trying to keep the whole thing going. But going back to the Fed, and you mentioned something very interesting that other countries like the ECB and Japan and the rest,
Switzerland, Japan, every single one.
They tried to raise the rates, but they couldn't. Now, Trump, he's continually telling the Fed, we need the rates lower, lower. And my thought process is, if I was going to destroy a central bank system, number one, make everyone realize who's responsible for this economic system, I would continually point them out. Two, if I was going to destroy them, how would I go about destroying a central bank system? I would leave them completely exposed. There's no war, there's no events, there's nothing to cover up anything. And I would allow their system to implode on itself. And and what I'm thinking is, since Trump, he likes Judy Shelton, he likes sound money, he likes gold. I have a funny feeling that he's continually pushing the Fed in this direction and pushing them so far that everyone is going to realize if something happens to this economy, because they're the worst enemy, they're worse than China.
Right.
That we need to blame the Fed for all of this. And by lowering the rates, you said, this is what I'm coming back to. You said the Fed has two things: rates, control the rates, and create currency. If he brings them to zero or negative, what do they have left?
That's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's interesting that you said that the demolition of the central bank system could be a planned demolition. Right?
Yeah.
Because it really is all about the confidence with rates this low for this long. Any consumers that really wanted it, or a lot of corporations, they have feasted on these low rates. And part of the problem is that it is all of the debt and the lending that goes on in the banking system, and negative rates kills a bank's profitability, forcing them to take even more risk with these derivatives and trading and interesting hidden fees and all of this, just to try and stay solvent. So, I hadn't really thought about the fact that it could be an intentional demolition of the current central bank system.
Because really, at this point, without...
You're right.
Really think about it. Let's say the Fed doesn't lower rates. Let's say Trump never said a word and the Fed was raising rates. What would happen to the economy?
Well, we saw why they did the pivot, right? The markets didn't like it. The markets are imploding. That's what people look at, the stock market. They don't really look at the bond market or anything else. If they open their 401k statement and it seems okay, then they think everything is okay. So, yeah, we saw what happened that prevented the Fed from continuing to give itself some ammunition. And 3 rate drops over, we're in November. I don't think I don't know if there's going to be another one before the end of the year, even though they said they're on pause. If the markets don't like that, they might not be pausing, because they also said that they left themselves a door open that they could walk through. We're on pause, but if something happens, we have to retain all of our abilities to do whatever. But that's a very interesting theory, because I do think, we're going into a completely new financial system. Maybe we need, a completely new center. Yeah. Instead of the central banks.
And again, it's hard to believe the Fed. In the early 2018, they told us they were going to raise the rates 4 times in 2019. That didn't happen. Now they're saying they're on pause. I don't know if I'm going to believe them, because they say one thing and they do another. So it's very...
Here's the credibility.
Yeah, it's very difficult to believe anything that they say. And the only 2 things, like you said, is they can... adjust the rates and create currency. And of course, they can fund other central banks around the world by propping them up and things probably that we don't even know of. If there was an audit, we'd probably see a huge amount of things, and we all be going, holy moly, look what they've been doing. And I think the people would be completely shocked about this. But do you think the global economy is slowing? Now, the IMF has been out there. The ECB has been out there. And they say that the global economy is slowing because of trade wars. Do you believe that?
The global economy, I definitely believe that the global economy is slowing. And I do think that the trade wars would have some participation in that, because it really does raise the cost for everybody. However, I don't think that's why the global economy is slowing. I think that whenever you get anything, look, I've been saying this since 2008. I will continue to say it. When the system imploded back then, it died and it's just been on life support. And again, I go back to, how many trillions and trillions. I mean, it boggles the mind, the level of money, new money that has been injected into the system. And yet it has not been economically stimulating, or we wouldn't be facing a global economic slowdown.
So do you think this is a central bank system that's by default slowing the entire economy around the world because of the way the whole thing is designed?
Yeah, well, I'm going to say absolutely, because if you just stop and think about it logically and take it down to like the minimum level, this is a debt-based system. So let's say I just get out of college and I'm living with my parents, so I have no bills, and I go out and I get a job and they're not asking me, my parents aren't asking me for any money. So that means all of that money that I take in from that job is disposable income. And hey, I need a car to get back and forth from my job. Now I have a couple choices. I can use the bus until I save up all the money for the car, or I can go and take on debt and buy the car. Okay, well, why not? I got plenty of money. I don't have to pay rent or anything. So I get my car on debt, and that did stimulate my economy today with a promise to pay back those dollars tomorrow. The bank, I'm making my payments on time, and the bank goes, okay, well, how about some credit cards? And I go, well, that would be awesome. So I get some credit cards, and my friends want to go out on Thursday, but I've already spent all my money, but I have those credit cards. So yes, that stimulated my economy today, but I got to pay it back tomorrow. Then the bank says, oh, all right, you're doing great with the debt on your car and you're doing great with the debt on your credit cards. How about a mortgage? So I go, yeah, I'm tired of living with my parents, and I take on this mortgage. And as long as I can afford that mortgage, as long as my income is there, not a problem. But what happens if I lose my job? Right? Now, all of a sudden, I can't pay that mortgage. So what happens with debt is it makes you appear wealthy until you can't cover that expense. And we actually hit peak debt as far as debt actually stimulating the economy. I think it was either 96 or 97. You can see it in the monetary velocity charts at the Federal Reserve. And which, by the way, I was just looking at them yesterday, where we had a little turn up in the monetary velocity. So the speed at which people were spending money. Oh, no, that is now cratering. So we're at the slowest level historically ever, but that's really what the problem is. Debt is only stimulating until it eats all of your income and your ability to take on new debt, which is why you have people that can't afford $400, for an emergency, or people stressing, and the people that are graduating from college with all these debt levels, and they also have credit card, debt that they've taken on. And so how can they go out and buy a house? So that's really what the problem is. Globally, in this debt system, we have reached a saturation point. We're taking on more debt. Not only does it not stimulate the economy, but that is why I believe we are absolutely in a global slowdown, and why lowering the rates, printing more money, just is not pulling us out of it like it used to. I mean, it did up until, I think, 96 or 97. And then it could make some appearances along the way. But now they have lost the ability through debt and interest rates to stimulate.
I mean, what you just described is a central bank system imploding on itself. And for people to survive, you need to have other ways of not making money, but having money or currency.
Or
to
having
spend.
wealth.
Having wealth. Whatever we would like to call it. Yeah. Because otherwise, if you just let's take, for example, today, if we just got rid of all credit cards, we got rid of all that, and people just had to live on what do you think people would be able to live today? No,
I do not. They would not be able to afford their standard of living.
So how about in a sound money system? if we were in a sound money system backed by gold or whatever it is, because we know a central bank, the currency loses its value over time. We take on debt in a sound money system. If we were still on a sound money system, would we have the same problems?
No, and when we were on a sound money system, I mean, there's always a trend cycle, and so the value would fluctuate, but it would do so within a range. In the debt system, it goes down because a sound money system creates restrictions around how much debt can be created and therefore how much currency can be created, and it actually forces fiscal responsibility, just like getting rid of if you got rid of every credit card and people and corporations, etc., and look at the unicorns, those corporations that get big fast, forget any earnings. I mean, yeah, the system, well, we would not have the system that we have today, but yeah, we would have purchasing power. And when you work for those, if it were $1, when you worked for $1 on a sound money system, when you saved it so that down the road when you retired, you had money to spend when you were no longer earning money, it retained its value. To me, that was, it has many other attributes. But that's, in my opinion, the single most important function of gold is to maintain its value over time, which is exactly what it's done for 6,000 years.
Well, let's talk about gold. Right now, gold hit 1,500. It was above 1,500, came down below 1,500. Why do you think gold is having such a problem now around the $1,500 mark? Do you still think gold is going to rise by the end of this year to maybe 2,000, 3,000?
Well, on the spot market, I definitely think we could see 2,000 by the end of this year on the spot gold market. I do like to differentiate between spot gold, which is a Wall Street product, easily manipulated. And I just actually today looked at the third quarter numbers on central bank gold purchases, and it's up 12% year over year. So central banks, regardless of what the spot price says, central banks are accumulating gold at the fastest pace ever because they know what you and I have been talking about during this interview. Now, it's easily manipulated. However, I'm not really convinced that there isn't going to be some kind of issue either in the repo market or even in the stock market between now and the first of the year. So I feel like the pumps are well primed. And what's been happening with spot, as you mentioned, I mean, it's been in this narrow trading range. But if you go back and look at the chart, there was a big gap back in 2013 where gold closed at this number one night and then opened at this number the next morning. That's a gap. Okay. And all gaps, technically, I don't care if you're talking about gold or stocks or bonds or whatever, but at some point, every single gap gets filled. And that's what's happening. And the reason is, I mean, just kind of think about it logically for a minute. But let's say that you were going to sell your gold at 1,900 and then you didn't, and then it went to 1,500 and you go, oh, man, if it ever gets that high again, I'm going to sell it. Or you were going to buy gold and you didn't buy it at 1,300 and it went up to 1,500 and you go, oh, man, if it ever gets to that 1,300 again, I'm going to buy it. Well, what that does is creates a pool of potential buyers and potential sellers at those levels. So technically, when that gap occurred, that's where that pool is. So for it to go up, dip into that pool, then you have more sellers, and for it to put pressure on it down, I mean, it's just working that off. That's all that it's doing. It does not in any way, shape, or form reflect its true fundamental value, which goes back to the primary reason, the most important function of gold, which is to hold its purchasing power. And that it's accomplished regardless of what these markets and regardless of how they have managed to manipulate the price. But just keep in mind, a rising gold price is an indication of a failing currency. And I would say that central banks are panicking at the same level that they were back in 2008, 2009, because their experiments are not working and people are starting to realize that their experiments aren't working. And I think that scares the Hades out of them.
And you said something very interesting about how the central banks, they're purchasing gold, because I remember back when Bernanke was in front of Ron Paul and they were talking about gold. And
Yes.
They said, oh, yeah, it's a barbarous relic. We just hold it because of historical value. And that's what we used to do. So we just do it. But it really serves no purpose whatsoever. So if it serves no purpose, why would the central banks take the gold in? Why wouldn't they create more fiat currency instead?
Hold that.
And hold that.
Right?
Look at all the paper we have. We have tons of it. We're going to be okay.
Yeah.
But instead, they're taking gold. And the Dutch central bank, they said something even stranger, where they said, not if, but when we enter this period of where the whole entire economic system implodes on itself, you might want to have some gold on you, because that is going to save you. Now, why do you think they came out and they said that? Why do you think they made that type of announcement?
Well, occasionally central banks actually speak truth. And, part of what they said in that statement was then you have the savings in the form of gold to, number one, instill confidence and rebuild the system. And what I also find extremely interesting is why they've moved their gold, where they store their gold, onto a military base.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
They took it away from New York. They did that one in, I think, 2014.
Right.
Right? So they repatriated their gold because they know if you don't hold it, you don't own it. It's pretty simple. And now they're making sure that it's well protected on a military base.
So what do they expect to happen if they put it on a military base? I mean, why didn't they just put it in there safe in the central bank? I mean, are they that worried?
It really seems so. But keeping in mind that they are the one that's the country that's had negative rates longer than anybody else.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that.
Exactly. And they're also the ones that recently went to negative rate mortgages. There is no doubt in there. I think the reason why they're coming out with this and making all these changes is because they know the system. There's no way to get out of the trap that central banks have worked themselves into. There's no way. And, apparently they think that maybe they think there's a possibility of there being a physical war, not just a digital war. So they better protect their gold because possession's 9/10 of the law. That's why they brought it back from New York, is my bet.
Do you think moving from this fiat system that we're in today, that's controlled by the central bank, that was created by the central bank, do you think the move to sound money would be easy? Because if we go back to 71, we were on gold, like a gold standard, and then we came off of the gold standard. And what people saw back then was inflation. People saw their CD interest rates at 16, 17, 18%.
Yeah, had one.
Yeah.
15%, 5 years it was.
And wages went up dramatically. Your home price went up dramatically. And this is all inflation, because as soon as we came off the gold standard, the value of the dollar just plummeted. That's why they needed to do all this. But the everyday person thought this was incredible. Whoa, I was making $5,000 a year. Now I'm making $15,000. My house went from, $8,000. Now it's $20,000. Now, when we move back from this fiat system, which is imploding, to a sound money, how does the reverse work?
Well, first of all, that's a great question. But if you stop and you think about it, every single time a system like that we've just been in, the fiat system, is destroyed, all confidence is lost, and they use gold. They need to use gold as well to instill that confidence so the public uses the money, because that's how they have control over us. They create it and we use it. And what happens if we refuse to use it? So we will go back on a gold standard. I don't see us going on 100% gold standard, but in order to get people to trust whatever that new money is going to be, And I personally think it's going to be a digital money. I don't know who's going to run this digital money because I really thought it would be the IMF, but that's all those central bankers. So if the central bankers go away, we'll have to see what that looks like. But I can definitely see a partially backed currency system that is partially backed by gold. And what happens to all of those fiat money assets that, and here's the key. Here's the key. If it is something that is created only in fiat, can only be sold and you can only convert it into fiat money, and it only pays you out in fiat money, when the fiat money dies, so does that. So all of these ETFs, and even staying on the gold theory, talking about gold, the ETFs, the GLD, or they've got new ones that are all derivatives and all this garbage. Okay, that goes away. Whoop. It just, whatever wealth you hold in there disappears. If it is a tangible asset, like say real estate, and other income producing assets, well, right now the inflation level on them is up here, and then that gets burned off. In Japan, in the early 90s, their stock market plunged, but their commercial real estate dropped 95%, and their residential real estate dropped 85% from where it was, those inflated values. So, and this is the piece that people really need to understand. Even though I can't guarantee this, it's happened well over 4,800 times. So, and there's never really been any other alternative, so I'm guessing this is what's going to happen again. When they do a revaluation and they do the final reset or multiple resets of the currency, they do it against gold. So as that income producing assets are going down like this, now in terms of that money, because gold is just gold, but in terms of that fiat money, it rises in numbers. Now, when we see that the smart money that understands this stuff is going in and accumulating, and you'll see it looks like the bottom of a cup. It's called a cup pattern. That's when you take some of your fiat gains here and you convert it into those income producing assets. That's what's happened over 4,800 times. So even though I can't guarantee that because it's certainly beyond my control, my bet is that that's the same thing that's going to happen. That's how the final wealth transfer occurs. So we can let those that understand this, like, why do you think the central banks are accumulating all this gold? Because they want to stay in power.
Yes.
Right? So we can watch them get into position to take advantage of it. But the beauty part is we can take advantage of their price manipulations. I mean, I'm still a buyer of gold at $2,000 an ounce. I'm a buyer of gold at $5,000 an ounce. I'm a buyer of gold at $10,000 an ounce. Because the more money that they create, the fiat money that they create, the higher in terms of that fiat is the value to hold your purchasing power. So as long as I can accumulate, I'm accumulating. And when they suppress the price, like today's a great day to buy, because you see, when I was looking at it earlier, it was something like 1486 or something like that. This is a great day to buy it. You take advantage of what they're doing for themselves. If you can emulate it. Smartest guys in the room on money. Who knows more?
So
emulate it.
So what happens to people that are holding cash in the bank, that are holding the fiat cash in their bank? They have savings, 40,000, 50,000. Does that just disappear, or is it revalued and now you really don't have 40 or 50? Now you only have 5,000? What happens at that point?
Or less. But what's going to happen with that bank that you're holding in there is negative rates, where you will watch your principal erode. And they intend to do it deeply enough and quickly enough that you actually see it, so that the choice that you will make will be to go out and spend that on anything that can attempt to hold its value and have some barter quality.
So it's almost like Weimar Germany, where people were wheeling all the cash in the wheelbarrow up to like the coffee shop and buying a cup of coffee because they just had to get rid of it, or a couple minutes later it was worth nothing.
Exactly. It's, that is a hyperinflationary event. Even if they're doing it with negative rates, and you see the negative rate levels that they've done so far, well, that didn't really inspire people to spend, did it? It actually inspired them to hoard the money.
Yeah.
Right?
Is there any way to counter any of this?
Yeah, gold.
So gold.
I'm sorry, and silver, both physical metals completely outside of the system.
So that means
because anything in the system is within their control.
So you're saying you need to hold the gold or silver. Now, do you
go ahead.
Do you have to have, let's say you have 40,000 or 30,000 or 10,000 in the bank. Do you have to should you take all of that and put it into gold?
Well, I mean, it's really on an individual circumstance. And so, we have a strategy that I actually developed for myself. So there's not really a blanket answer to that. However, what I can tell you is what I have personally done and what I continue to do for myself. I keep in the bank as much as I need to keep those automatic withdrawals, happening, and a little cushion because I'm running a business. But I don't keep more than that. I keep a bare minimum just to keep everything together. I do have cash, but I maintain that in a private vault outside of the banking system because I can always make a deposit. Even when there's a bank holiday, I'll be able to make a deposit. That's what we've seen recent history show. I will not always be able to make a withdrawal. Plus, even though that the value of that cash will get printed away, if it is held outside of the system, then what the central banks are calling that is cash in the wild because they won't be able to embed a chip that will maintain the devaluation at the same level of the whatever's in the savings account. So if they've got a negative 4% interest, any cash that's got that chip in it will also, whenever you go to spend it, it's going to reflect that. Having said all of that, there is only a certain level of cash that you need because that is your first line of defense. So beyond that level, 100%, all of my wealth is in gold, silver, food, water, energy, community. I mean, these are the things that we need to do to be self-sustaining. So while I can't say you take every single penny and you put it into gold and silver, truthfully, I have a very high level of comfort with this because I've been studying this stuff on some level my whole life, but currency life cycles and what happens since 1987. So, I have most of my wealth easily. Most of my wealth is held in gold and silver, and I'll never have enough until I don't have that option to buy it anymore.
I agree. Lynette, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work and get in touch with you?
Well, we actually love human contact, so they can always call us at 888-696-4653. And all of our strategy specialists have been trained in the same strategy that I developed for myself. It's just tweaked because everybody has different circumstances and goals. Plus, I produce, we have a YouTube channel, and there's new material on there every single week. And they can just find us on YouTube. Just Google ITM Trading or put my name in. I'm pretty sure it'll come up. Yeah, it'll come up. And that's how they can get a hold of us, itmtrading.com.
Great. I'll put all the links at the bottom of the video. Lynette, thank you very much for being on the Spotlight. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.